Welcome to Iowa Postgame with Coach Gary Close and Cory Brada here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Iowa with the routine victory. I think we can start saying that now that we're, 4 games into the regular season. A 108-82 victory over Alabama State. And, Coach, I know we've talked about this. Our last postgame that we did together was the Longwood game, which was actually their season opener. But you kind of have to read between the lines with some of these early games, especially with this schedule. What did you glean from tonight's effort from Iowa?
Well, I thought Iowa played well. I think, in those type of games, what you'd like to do is get off to a good start and maybe take any chance that they're going to try to hang around a little bit and make it a game right out the window. Kind of like, maybe what they didn't do the game before, where North Carolina Central hung around probably longer than they would have liked. So they got off to a really quick start and really didn't look back. And as you said, kind of coasted to a pretty comfortable win.
Gary, this is a Alabama State team that played Iowa State close 2 nights ago, 8-point game. And I know the announcers this evening mentioned that and that it was a 2-point game late. How much can you play that game of comparing how a mid-major plays against another mid-major? We had that happen with Missouri, Kansas City. They played Minnesota fairly close. So Iowa was pretty impressive in that game against the Kangaroos. How much can you play that game comparing?
Well, I think it's, as you try to evaluate your team, all you got is what they've played. The season is early, so there's not much information and scouting reports and things like that. So anytime you see a team that can be competitive, a team like Alabama State, they play all these guarantee games. So playing at Carver Hawkeye Arena or any other arena is not a big deal to them. They're not going to be intimidated. They've done it before, and that's why I thought it was important for them to get off to a good start, so that they hopefully they whatever chance they have of making the game competitive was going early, and it was. So the fact that they've been fairly competitive in the other games, leads you to believe that they had some weapons that could possibly cause some problems if you didn't take care of it.
And Coach, I know a lot of Iowa fans at this point in the season, just 4 games in, 5 if you count the exhibition. I think a lot of fans are probably sitting here saying, all right, let's get to some actual competition now. And that's understandable. We've got a couple more games here coming up against teams that Iowa, again, should win comfortably against. Is there any concern from you, or should there be concern of a letdown for the players who may start to take on that similar mindset of just, we're tired of playing these mid-majors, these bye games?
Yeah. And as a coach, you're always worried about those type of things. I think if the fans had their way, they'd be playing Gonzaga and UCLA and schedule like that. And with this team, with what they've lost, as young as they are in the new parts, you can understand why they've slowly moved into their schedule. And it's going to pick up, but it gives a chance to let everybody get their legs underneath them and get some confidence and work out some things. And so I can understand why they're doing it. And it won't be long before the competition is going to jump up, and that's good. That's kind of what you want in the non-conference schedule.
I think as far as the biggest thing I gleaned from this game, of course, the 23-point field goals made is a record for Iowa. But I wouldn't expect that for any game for this team, because this team is not necessarily what I think of as a great 3-point shooting team, although it's early. We're just kind of, I guess, hypothesizing here. Is this surprising that they've had a couple? I think of the first game against Longwood, they shot the 3 really well. They're showing the ability to be able to shoot collectively at a good level from behind the arc. What do you see from Iowa shooters?
Well, they're building a pretty good resume in terms of how they're shooting the ball. And tonight, you don't know all their strategy. Obviously, they stayed in that 2-3 zone. They didn't come out of it. It wasn't very active, wasn't very aggressive. So they got a lot of open looks and got on a roll. And that's the worry you have if you let 3-point shooters get comfortable, and they did. They got comfortable, and I think all their threes were in the framework of the offense. They didn't force anything. that's good. They had a lot of assists. I think it was 20. I'm looking right here, 28 assists on 38 baskets. So that means you're moving the ball. It's the second game that we've done where their assist to turnover ratio is really high. They only had 10 turnovers, scoring 108 points. Now they did play a pretty soft zone without much pressure. So, forcing turnovers might not be as strong in a situation like that, but they handle the ball well. They move the ball well. They got good open looks and they made them. So I'm sure the defense is going to get better, and that's going to be the real test when the defense gets a little tighter and the shots are not so wide open.
And Coach, before the Iowa game, we were live with Frank Henderson, who actually played at Ball State under Billy Taylor, is also Tony Perkins' uncle. So sort of an interesting connection there. And I will say this, and I'm not trying to suck up to Frank, but Tony Perkins is really emerging. He seems to be playing with a much greater level of confidence than we saw maybe the first couple of games, and certainly the last game out against North Carolina Central. Iowa was struggling a bit to put that team away, and really sort of had a jolt of energy for that team defensively, and he's long. Is Tony emerging to you? Do you see the same thing I do?
Yeah, and I think you saw a little bit last year towards the end of the year. He played some good quality minutes and gave him some production off the bench. So, the more depth that they can develop, the stronger they're going to be, because you're going to have foul trouble. You're going to have injuries. You're going to have guys that are not playing well. And so if somebody like him can come off the bench and give him a boost, that's obviously to your advantage. So it's good to see.
And he's shown the ability to knock down the three, which is not something that I really expected. Of course, he's not a three-point shooter. He is more of a slasher. And we're seeing now Fran really try to implement this press, which, of course, Fran's always had that in his defensive playbook, if you will. But I think with their length and athleticism, these Murray twins, their ability to just implement their length and their athleticism. Yeah. Chris really looked good tonight, Gary. That's been my one bugaboo about either of the Murray twins, is I feel like Chris just still doesn't play with a great level of confidence. Maybe I'm reading into his game too much, and maybe I'm wanting him to look like his brother, and I shouldn't. His three ball is really starting to take shape, and we saw that at DME Academy, him shoot the ball at a really high level. What have you seen from Chris?
Well, I think he's a young player. He didn't get a chance to play a whole lot last year, so if you're not playing, it's hard to get confidence. You gotta get out on the court and produce, and that's where the confidence comes, along with working hard and knowing you put the time in to improve. Which sounds like both of them have no problem doing that. So it's nice to see. I think you just kind of expect, hopefully, it'll continue to improve and make solid progress. And again, like the Perkins kid, that gives you another guy off the bench that can give you something, give you some production, which is nice to see too.
Interesting comment here from the Real Hayden. He says this team might be more live by the three, die by the three than I originally thought. And that is an interesting topic, because I don't look at this team and think they're going to be reliant on the three. But the one thing that makes me wonder if they can survive without the three-point shot, Gary, is they don't have that five that we're used to seeing in Fran's system. Luka Garza, even Adam Woodbury. I know he wasn't really an offensive juggernaut. Gabe Olashaney's another guy who I know you're familiar with, you coached against.
Right.
Not to sound like Debbie Downer again here, but Josh Ogundele does not look ready for the moment. At least he didn't tonight, and Riley Mulvey doesn't either. Are you seeing the same thing there?
Well, they're both young and unproven. So until they do something, obviously you're going to have some question. Offensively, you like to have some flexibility in terms of being able to score both inside and out. If you're shooting threes, you're not going to get to the free throw line a lot, and that's where penetration, and whether it's off the dribble or into the post. So as they play better teams that take their three away, then they're going to have to show that they can get some inside baskets, get to the free throw line, things like that, to be competitive and beat teams that are the stronger teams that are going to be on their schedule.
And Gary, we could spend this whole day talking about Keegan Murray. because since we were on last after the Longwood game, he has continued to impress, albeit against inferior competition. Of course, he had the 26 or what was it, 27 and 21, I believe.
Yeah, that was great performance.
26 and 6 tonight, and I don't know how many minutes. Actually, I can find that here.
Yeah,
actually,
probably not a whole lot. 20 something.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't even know that maybe he hit 20. He probably did. He came in the second half, but he's not playing a lot of minutes, and he's efficient. You see 10 of 16 from the field. I'll have to grab. I'm pulling up the official box score that was just sent out from Iowa, but he seems to just be playing with great efficiency. To me, once we get into Big Ten play, he is going to be a 35 to 40-minute guy, no question. Am I wrong about that, Gary?
Well, yeah, barring foul trouble and fatigue and things like that. But yeah, I don't think there's any question about that. He's very active. He's around the ball all the time. He's getting deflections. He's getting rebounds in addition to the scoring. What'll be interesting is he'll be, as teams develop their scouting reports, he's going to be right at the top, whereas last year he was probably at the bottom. And so instead of playing against their fourth or fifth best defense player, he might be playing against their best or second best. And that's where, like the team itself, that's where we're going to really see what happens here when the competition gets a little stiffer. But certainly as far as we've gone so far, he has really looked impressive.
21 minutes for Keegan tonight. And again, the numbers speak for themselves, and that's been pretty much on point for him. Let me pull up Peyton Sanfort's numbers. I see a couple comments in our chat about his performance tonight. He does have a pretty stroke.
He does,
Gary, and it's a quick release, and that's sometimes you don't always see that right away from college players. Am I wrong?
And he's not afraid to shoot it, and especially being a freshman, being a young player, first time out. He's got a lot of confidence and puts it up, and yeah, he's been really, really good off the bench, and tonight was no exception. He did a great job.
12 attempts. 12 attempts from three. So you're absolutely right. Not afraid to shoot it. And I've said from the beginning of the season, preseason, I said, to me, the biggest keys for this team are, do they have two or three really good 3-point shooters? They obviously have one in Jordan. If Sanford can be that second 3-point shooter, I just think that spaces everything up so much more, Gary. And again, not that other guys can't hit threes, but let's be honest, the only pure 3-point shooters on this team are probably Peyton and Jordan.
Well, I think you got to put Keegan in there now. I don't think there's any doubt that it's maybe it's a little bit early, but so far he has shown he's able to do it as well. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see as it goes along if they can continue that. Obviously, this is an incredible percentage, but something close to it will certainly help their cause.
Real Hayden says Sanford's stroke has me salivating. It's a pretty shot. I'll tell you what makes me salivate, Gary. And this is, I don't normally salivate over free throw strokes, but as much as we love Jordan Bohannon from the free throw line, Keegan Murray has got a beautiful stroke, does he not?
And he needs one because he's probably going to lead the team in free throws attempted, I'm guessing, because he'll get some inside looks and his ability to drive. So when he gets fouled, he's got to step up and make them. And so far he's been doing that.
So Keegan tonight, 10 of 16 from the field, 2 of 5 from three, 4 of 5 from the free throw line. And again, he did all that in 21 minutes. Mm-hmm. Jordan Bohannon, 4 of 8 from three. Of course, he struggled Tuesday. I have to imagine that was largely in part to the fact that he was on the verge of breaking the all-time Big Ten record.
Yeah.
So let's take a moment to reflect on what he's done. I know it was inevitable that Jordan would break the record. And I know it was in an extended career, Gary. So there's going to be
not by much, just a few games. And obviously the COVID season was not as long as maybe it would have been regularly. So anytime you are a leader in a league like the Big Ten, a career leader, you've done something impressive. I don't care what it is. And 3-point shooting is obviously one, but to be the number one 3-point shooter in the history of this league and all the great players that have played in it is quite an accomplishment that he should be very proud of, as should the program.
Chris Kingsbury is obviously the first guy that comes to mind for Iowa fans when they think of elite three-point shooters. You've obviously seen so many, whether you coach them or you coach against them in the Big Ten. Where does Jordan stack as far as all-time shooters in the Big Ten?
Right where he is as far as making them all. He's as good as there have been. He's confident. He'll take big shots. He'll make big shots. He doesn't shy away from the moment. Obviously, he's got a great stroke, a consistent stroke. He's one of the all-time best. And I think fans got to understand how hard he's worked on that. You just don't – you're not a shooter like that unless you put a lot of time in and taking a lot of shots in an empty gym. And I know he has, and it's paying off big time.
Okay, Doug makes – I don't want to say a negative comment, but it's hard to be negative when you win, again, you're 4-0 and you're winning by 25. But he brings up an interesting point. He's seeing closing out on three-point shooters still be a problem at times, stopping the dribble drive and kick out. Are you seeing the same thing, or are we reading way too far into games that are out of hand and maybe Iowa letting down a little bit?
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is I wrote down after the first half that Alabama State shot 50% from the floor, 40% from three, and 75% from the free throw line, and they trailed by 27. I mean, that's almost unheard of. And so, I think as a coach, you're always, no matter whether you win or lose, you're always looking for areas that you got to get better. The key thing, especially as you go into the Big Ten, the key thing is, are you going to continue to improve? Are you going to become a better team next week and the following week and right on through the entire season? The teams that win it do. And they got to do it at both ends, and they haven't been challenged on the defensive end yet. And until they do, we really don't have any real solid answers. But the team today has shot a pretty good percentage, and that's got to be a little bit of a concern. You want people to shoot a lower percentage than what they shot, but tonight it didn't hurt because they shot so well themselves.
And they got out to such a large lead early.
Yeah.
So many of these threes were made in that first half. 63 in the first half? So they're on pace for, 126 for the game.
Yeah, yeah.
You wonder how much that does play into a team's mind at halftime. I will say one thing that you brought up. You were actually the individual that brought it up initially, Gary, about a week ago. And that is this number. Iowa continues to avoid high turnover numbers, which to me might be the most impressive thing about this team so far, because it is a young team, and these are games where typically you get a little sloppy against these by opponents.
Especially in a game that gets out of hand, you can get a little sloppy. And like we said, to score over 100 points and only have 10 turnovers is really, really strong. And the guards deserve credit. I think Joe had 10 assists and only 2 turnovers. That's obviously a huge assist to turnover ratio. And so far they've done a great job, but they even showed signs of that last year. They did a great job of handling the ball, and it's kind of continued. It's I'm sure it's something that they stress, and to be a high scoring team and to keep your turnovers down is impressive. And the experience of the guards and their ability to make good decisions has been evident so far. Now, as the defense gets tougher and players get longer and quicker and there's more pressure on the ball and games are tighter, that's when we'll find out. But so far, they've done a really, really impressive job of taking care of the ball.
Officially from the university, 11 assists for Joe Toussaint.
Oh, my, that's great. Yeah.
So, terrific game for him. And, he actually made his only 2 three-point shots tonight as well, which, man, if he could consistently, I know we've been saying this the length of his career here, but if Joe Toussaint could consistently make threes, man, doesn't he become such a more dangerous offensive weapon? Because teams they just sag off him. They take away the drive.
Yeah, you can say that just about anybody. If you're, you look at Ben Simmons and that whole saga. I mean, if you're, one thing in the Big Ten, teams are so well scouted that they'll know your strength, they'll know your weaknesses, and they'll devise their scouting report and their game plan based on those strengths and weaknesses. So obviously the less you have, and certainly as a point guard, your ability to penetrate and make plays. If you're not a threat out there, then the ability to penetrate is not going to be as strong as if they have to get out there and cover you beyond three. And he's quick, so if he can be solid out there and to the point where they at least got to guard him there, then that will create better chances for him to penetrate and create opportunities for other players.
So not to imply that these guys are going to be all of a sudden great three-point shooters here at Iowa, but Joe Toussaint has shown, at least it appears, that his three-point shot has improved. Same with Tony Perkins. Aaron Eulis, haven't really seen that out of him yet, but certainly Chris is looking like he can be a somewhat reliable three-point shooter. You mentioned Keegan's ability, Jordan, Peyton. All of a sudden you're looking at this team, and we didn't even get to see Patrick McCaffrey, who was out tonight due to a lower body injury. All of a sudden you may have enough shooters to where if you can at least get, again, that's my big question, is a true five post presence against some of the bigger teams in the Big Ten. You might be able to hang with teams this year throughout.
Yeah. I think you're exactly right. I think that's, that so far they have not needed an inside presence. I mean, that's going to change as you get into tougher non-conference games and obviously into the league. And so that'll be a thing we'll have to watch, is the development of all those guys inside. But I wouldn't even be surprised if they go small, if they, I don't know if they're so set on 1 through 5, and they just might play Murray at the 5, even though he's not the 5, but just play a smaller lineup and they're long and athletic.
Do that against Kofi and against Zach Edey, and
well, then maybe he plays more zone. That'll be the development of the team and how they're all developing, and you're putting your best 5 out on the floor, and maybe in some cases then you got to change your defensive outlook. But I'm sure they're going to keep working with those guys, and as of now they haven't needed a whole lot of production out of them. But if they can, play good post defense and rebound and take care of the ball and be a threat in there, then that might be enough. It'll be they probably need them more on the defensive end than on the offensive end at that position. So time will tell. They're both developing young players, and they may be totally different in a month. That's the fun part of watching teams progress.
Coach, you've seen, I don't want to say hundreds, but in reality, hundreds of Big Ten teams over the course of the many years you've been in the game. Early on during these games against the likes of Alabama State, against the likes of North Carolina Central, and so no doubt you've been able to sort of evaluate and learn what to look for. This is going to be a generic question, but based on what you've seen 4 games in, how good is this team?
Well, I think they got a chance. I think that's what you want. I think they've shown enough talent and enough expertise in terms of how they're playing that you got to give them a chance. Until you get into the hard part of the conference, you just never know. I mean, this league is a tough league, but I think so far you got to be excited. They've done some real nice things. Murray has obviously emerged. They're shooting the ball well. They're taking care of the ball. They're doing a lot of good things. Now they just got to see it. Like we said, they got to just keep improving as the competition gets stiffer.
All right, so competition, I want to sort of segue away from this game tonight to the conference in general, because I'm already hearing a bit of a narrative around the Big Ten 2 weeks in, and certainly it's far too soon to push the panic button. But this narrative that the Big Ten is overrated, they have dropped a number of these Gabbett game matchups early here, Gary. Of course, Wisconsin losing to Providence. Tonight, Xavier upsetting Ohio State. We saw Michigan lose. We saw Illinois lose. Is the Big Ten overrated? Are there concerns right now from you as a former Big Ten coach?
Well, I think the games that they've lost to good teams. Now, some of them were at home, which would raise a little bit of a red flag, but I think the competition was really good, and it's early. All these teams have lost players that they're trying to replace, and they're playing really good teams, and a lot of the games came down to 1 or 2 possessions that they could have easily won. So I think it's a little early to get too concerned. But because the league is always going to be tough. I mean, I don't care how they do in the non-conference. The league is brutal. It's terrific coaches, good players, great crowds. That's been the case for the Big Ten forever. So I think it's a little bit early. I think it might be a hair surprising, but like I said, I think they've lost to good teams in very close games that could have gone either way. And so there might be a little bit of a concern, but I think it's still pretty early.
Yeah, Michigan losing at home to Seton Hall, and I know Seton Hall, we don't know much about them, I guess, at this point. That was certainly probably the most surprising to me. I believe Illinois' loss to Marquette was on the road.
Yeah, and Illinois didn't have the big kid because he's suspended, right. So that was big. And both Michigan and Illinois lost sizable leads down the stretch. Illinois had 26 turnovers. I mean, if you have 26 turnovers on the road, you're not going to beat anybody. I'm surprised it was as close as it was with that many turnovers. And I think Michigan had a double-digit lead late. I didn't see all that game, but so that's a little bit surprising that they would lose that at home with that kind of a lead. So, but both of them had chances to win and could have very easily won. And you'll see that early. You'll see where you're trying to find your way and you struggle and hopefully you make enough plays to survive and get a win and move on and maybe not play to your capability, but find a way to win. And in that case, they didn't. But it's probably a good learning lesson. I mean, I think both coaches have got a lot to hit their team up with. And hey, we're not where we want to be, and nobody is, at this stage of the season. So in some cases, it might almost be a blessing in disguise.
And the games we did not mention in the so-called Big East Big Ten Challenge, Indiana did squeak by St. John's last night.
Yep.
If you're talking about, I don't know, just image, that you need that win if you're the Big Ten. Another game that Iowa or the Big Ten needs tonight, Rutgers is playing DePaul, and right now DePaul is leading at halftime 33-29. So if DePaul wins that game, if my count is correct, Gary, that means the Big Ten will went 2-6.
Yeah.
Against the Big East. Again, not a good number.
No, it's disappointing, but it's early. I think that's how you got to look at it. It's they certainly would have liked to have done better. But like I said, I think the teams that have won, there have been some good teams they played, which is understandable. The Big East is a good conference, obviously. So right. It's not like they're losing to I mean, look at Oregon. Oregon is one of the top teams. They lose by like 25 at home. It was double digits for sure, and at home. And so not early in the year when you're trying to find your way and you're with new players and everything else, it's rankings and things like that right now don't mean a whole lot because it's just too. I mean, Virginia's lost 2 games already and dropped out of the top 25. So
they got steamrolled by Houston.
Yeah. But Houston's good. I mean, Houston was a terrific team last year. I don't know exactly who they lost, but well coached, and so you're going to see that in the non-conference, especially early in the non-conference. And so, if it continued, then you'd really be worried. We'll just have to see what happens as we go through the rest of these non-conference games and see how the Big Ten does.
Another surprising result from the Big Ten was the Maryland loss. They lose at home to George Mason.
Yeah. But you see, George Mason, that's a game that George Mason's probably 10, 15 minutes away from Maryland. It's a much bigger game for them than it is Maryland. It's the same thing Xavier and Ohio State. They're tired of reading about Ohio State all the time. It's their chance to get them at home. And so there's a lot of incentive there. And they're good teams that are well coached. So it's not a total shock.
UMass beat Penn State by 25. I know Penn State's not expected to be anywhere near the top of the conference, but to lose to UMass, who had lost to Yale by 20. I don't know.
That's an interesting, for sure.
It is.
New coach, a lot of players left.
Right.
They probably got some work. They probably got some work to do.
They do. So thoughts on Wisconsin? I didn't get to watch the Providence Wisconsin game. I'm curious. I'm sure you did. What
I
did you
did.
see from the Badgers?
Well, Wisconsin didn't have Davis, which was their leading scorer and probably their best player. They did not shoot the ball well from three. They have so far. I mean, there's a good example. Sometimes those threes don't go down, and Providence had a real good inside player, a graduate student. I can't remember his name right now, but he's really good, and they had a hard time defending him in the post. Real good player, and so that was enough for a pretty good Providence team to get a really good win on the road. So I think the combination of that kid being hard to guard and Wisconsin not having Davis contributed to that outcome.
A couple other interesting Big Ten results thus far, Gary. I didn't get to watch this game either, but Minnesota surviving Princeton in double OT on Sunday. And then, of course, Nebraska losing to Western Illinois. That's a Western Illinois team that Iowa gets here in a few weeks, I believe. Doug Moore does have a question for you, Gary. He says, do you like the fact that the Big Ten now plays Big Ten games in December? What are your thoughts on the schedule now?
Yeah, I kind of like it. It's nice to see some Big Ten games earlier in the year. We know with the 20 games, they really didn't have much choice. They had to move the schedule back a little bit to get all the games in and not be so crowded just from January through the end of the year. So, yeah, I like it, and I like the fact they're playing 20 games, and it's good as a spectator. Now, maybe as a coach, maybe I wouldn't be as for it because the Big Ten is a grind. But for a fan, it's great. I enjoy watching Big Ten games in December.
And I'll be completely honest, going back to the Big Ten is overrated narrative, I wouldn't be shocked, and maybe I'm wrong, but I would not be shocked to see the Big Ten go in and win the ACC Big Ten Challenge. This
could happen. Yeah,
a wake-up call for some of these teams, and they show up in late November.
Yeah, that'll be a good call to see how they do against another real strong league. If they struggle against them too, then maybe there's some question. But like we had talked about earlier, it's how much better you get. And we've seen all kinds of examples of it where teams just keep getting better and better, and they come not even ranked. And by the end of the year, they're in the top 10 and they're making a run through the tournament. So it's that's going to be the key thing is how teams can continue to improve and learn from defeats. Hopefully you can learn while you win, but in both cases, in order to improve and progress as the year goes on.
And so Virginia, we brought them up earlier for anybody who missed the very beginning of our show. So Virginia lost to Navy, I believe, on opening night, the 9th. Come back, they beat Radford, then they lose by 20 to Houston, who, as you brought up, is a very good program. Kelvin Sampson, I believe, isn't he the head coach still down there?
Yeah.
Terrific team, but that's a Virginia team now that's 1-2. Now they will have an opportunity. They play Coppin State tomorrow. Then they get Georgia, Lehigh before Iowa. And, of course, we can kind of look ahead. I know you've probably got the coach's mindset of not looking ahead past your next game. But I know Iowa fans are wanting this Virginia game to happen now based on what we've seen. And I don't know how much you've actually watched Virginia from start to finish in any of their games. But does Iowa match up well enough to be able to go on the road? And, I mean, you are very familiar with Tony Bennett's defense, I'm sure.
Yeah.
It's obviously infamous for good reason. Can Iowa score against that defense, do you think?
Well, I have not seen Virginia play at all this year, so it's a little hard to tell. I will say this: they'll be well coached and they will defend well. And I think the one thing that I would worry about is you go through these games where scoring is really easy, and there's a lot of possessions, and there's not much resistance to your offense. And all of a sudden, you're going to play a team like Virginia, who's going to lower the number of possessions. So it's going to be a lower possession game. They're going to play solid defense. They're going to make it hard for you to score. All of a sudden, wait a second, what's happened to our offense when you're just going up against a really good defensive team? So it's going to be interesting to see from the standpoint of, wow, this has been easy, and we've really not faced a whole lot of resistance and stopping us. All of a sudden, there's bodies on you, and there's just teams in better position and making life miserable. And will they be able to be patient and get good shots when now they really don't have to, because the defenses just haven't been very good.
Right. Okay, Gary, let's look ahead to Western Michigan. Do you know anything about, what are they, the Broncos? Or is it the Western
They
Michigan?
are the Broncos.
Okay.
And that's about all I know about them. I think they're in Kalamazoo.
Okay. Well, Iowa football has a bit of a hairy history. I believe. Weren't they that was one of the Iowa's lost to Central Michigan and Western Michigan. They have not lost to Eastern Michigan. The directional Michigan schools have left a bad taste in Iowa fans' mouths. So the question is, does this team have any chance at pulling an upset? And I would, based on their early season performances, they got blitzkrieg by Michigan State by 44. And they just beat, I don't even know who this is, Val State,
Saginaw Valley State.
Saginaw Valley. They got beat by 17 to Saginaw Valley State, Gary.
Saginaw Valley State beat them. I think that's a really good, strong Division II program, but I'm not exactly sure. So I would say the chances are not good.
I would have to agree with you.
I'm not going to give you any coach speak and think they're going to come in here and give you a battle. I would say that one's not going to be competitive, but you never know.
How do you, we'll take the last couple minutes of the show, Gary. How do you manage, if you're Fran now, I think you pretty much know what you have with Keegan, right? Not that he didn't before the season, but like, how do you manage these last few, I don't want to call them gimmies, but these bye games to where you don't risk injury to a guy like Keegan? Do you just say, well, injury is part of basketball, we take that risk going in, or do you limit him to 10 to 15 minutes in a game because of that risk?
Well, I think you can't play afraid. But I do think that if like a good example tonight, that if the game's in hand, not only does it give him a chance to get some rest and reduce the chance of injury, but it gives other guys a chance to play. And from that, some guys might emerge, say, hey, wait, we gotta take a closer look at this guy. He might be able to help us. So I think I think you do it for a number of reasons, not just because the game's out of hand, but to get some rest, reduce the chance of injury, but also to see if you can find some guys that might be able to help you down the road, because somebody might get hurt. Somebody might get in foul trouble. Somebody might get sick. You just got to be prepared. And I think probably what he's doing, hey, we just got to keep improving. He can look at some things. Hey, they shot too high a percentage, or, whatever. Rebounding maybe wasn't strong in a couple games. So we got to improve so that when the schedule turns, we're as good as we can possibly be heading into what we know is going to be. They know the games are going to get tougher. It's just a matter of time. So let's try to keep improving and then take each game one at a time.
And man, they do get tougher. So you get Western Michigan and Portland State. Okay. Now Portland State is 2-1. For anybody that wants an early projection on them, they actually played Oregon State pretty darn close. Their other two games have been against, I'm assuming, maybe you can tell me, Gary, are these Division II opponents, Evergreen State and George Fox? I don't know.
I would say both of those. When they got names on them, they're probably Division II, George Fox. And okay. I'd say those are both Washington, up there in the Northwest, Division II programs would be my guess, yeah.
Now, is Portland, are they Division I?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, they'll get Portland before they get Iowa. They've only got one game before the Iowa game. So they just played, I guess they just played last night. So they're 2-1, but they did play Oregon State close.
Oregon State was a team that made a long run in the NCAA tournament last year. I don't know what they lost, but they had a good year last year.
Iowa State did beat them the other day here in Ames, which is a good win for Iowa State, who obviously had problems beating anybody last year, let alone Power 5 opponents. So Iowa gets Portland State after the Western Michigan game, and then looking at their schedule.
The Portland State team had played Iowa State, went back home, and now they're coming back to play Iowa.
No, Oregon State.
Or Oregon State, I mean.
Oregon
State.
State.
That's right. Yeah, I got you. Yeah,
Yep.
We're playing Portland. Yeah, I got you. Yep.
Oregon State lost to Iowa State.
Yeah.
So, Iowa will get Virginia, And then, I mean, what a start to the Big Ten season. You get Purdue on the road, which,
Ooh, yeah.
Gary, you have to know Iowa's history with Purdue. At least recent history is not very favorable, even with Iowa's great teams.
Well, a lot of teams is not very favorable. They've been good, especially at that place. That might be the toughest place. I mean, there's some tough places to play in the Big Ten, but that is right up there at the top. That will be
crazy.
Yeah, that will be a war. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that'll be a challenge for sure.
Then they get Illinois back in Carver.
Oof.
They get Iowa State here in Ames, and they get Utah State at the Pentagon. Those are going to be some fun games, Gary.
They'll learn a lot about their team after those 4 games. Yeah, you'll have a much better read. But I like what they've done. I think they've handled this the right way. They got to get some guys some minutes. They got to see where they're at. Gradually strengthen the schedule, which they're going to do, and with the type of team they had and what they lost, it's a route that a lot of coaches would take.
All right, one final question for you, and this really doesn't have anything directly to do with Iowa, but I've had some people ask me this question, and I'm kind of curious as to your opinion on this, and I don't know if you have any sort of a read on the situation anyway, so I'll give you some background. Are you aware of the name Xavier Foster?
Not really.
So he's a 4 5-star kid out of Oskaloosa, would have been class of, I believe, 2020. He was down to Iowa State, and Baylor. Ended up picking Iowa State over Iowa and Baylor. The reason I'm bringing him up, he's a 7-footer. It was a huge, I think a lot of people here in the state of Iowa felt it was between Iowa and Iowa State. So it was a loss, I guess, for Fran in the recruiting trail. But he was recently, and I know this too, just because of our website and our local news site here in Ames, he is under investigation right now for a sexual assault. He was dismissed from Iowa State maybe 3 weeks ago, prior to the season starting. And I'm just curious, and I'm not implying that Fran would go after somebody like this, but in a situation like this, in the climate we live in now, I know it's probably different than it was 15, 20 years ago. Does he have any chance at regaining a scholarship, being able to find a home somewhere else? Or does something like this, if he's found to be guilty of some sexual misconduct, and I'm not going to go into detail about what these allegations are, would a coach look at him?
Well, I think it depends on what happens with his legal situation. If he's found guilty, then I think he's got a much tougher road than if he's not. And there's all kinds of examples of people giving players second chance that have made mistakes. That's a pretty serious one that I think a lot of coaches would not entertain based on that. But it just goes to show you how important decisions are and how they affect your future. And one bad one can really screw things up.
Well, I don't mean to sound presumptuous, but just the fact that Otzelberger dismissed him and there have been no criminal charges filed against him would tell me that the investigation probably isn't going in a favorable direction for Xavier. And some fans say, well, would Fran consider reaching out? And obviously not at this point, but I just was curious from your perspective if it would even be a possibility for anybody. Of course, you don't want to see a young man, I don't say ruin his future on one bad mistake, but you reap what you sow. And there's especially for an NCAA kid, it's disappointing.
That's a sad story.
All right, Gary. Well, it has been a pleasure for the past 50 minutes again to talk about Iowa, and I know you take joy in all of these games, and we appreciate our watchers and our listeners this evening. I know it's can get sort of we get impatient. We want to see better competition, but as you brought up, this is what this team needs. Yeah,
it's going to come here before long, and the season goes by fast. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, pretty soon it's going to be February, March, and so we got to enjoy every game we can, watch them develop, and then know that there's some real competition around the corner. We want to keep improving. So when that happens, we got a chance to be competitive, win some games.
Absolutely, and want to remind everybody, please share our show out in social media. Gary has been so kind to join us for Iowa basketball postgame shows throughout the season. So help us grow, help our reach be broader. And if you're enjoying the content, certainly others will as well. And a reminder to our Iowa football fans, if you're here listening, that we will be going live with Mark Rogers, the voice of college football, in about 10 minutes over at the Iowa at the Voice of College Football channel here on YouTube. So swing on over there once we're done here and some Iowa, Illinois pregame. What's that, Gary?
Busy night tonight.
It is a busy night. And like I told everybody pregame, my brain fog is actually starting to feel a little bit better. Had some soup, had some more water during our game, and my mind is starting to work a little bit better. So
I'll tell the Iowa football fans a story. Back when I was coaching at Iowa, I coached theory of basketball class. This is a long time ago, and one of my students was Brett Bielema. So I'm a little disappointed that Brett's not going to be able to come back and coach in Kinnick Stadium this weekend. But I had a lot of football players in it. Not because it was an easy class; it was a very tough class. But Brett was one of them, amongst others. And what a neat guy! It was fun to have him, and that's a long time ago. But I enjoyed teaching the class, and he was one of my students.
Everything I've heard about Brett has been positive, and I'm not really upset he's not coming, because, man, I think if anybody, I don't think there's anybody probably wants to beat Iowa more than Brett.
Yeah, probably so.
I will say this, him not coaching on Saturday doesn't really make me sway my feelings about this game, because if Iowa fans recall, opening day last year against Purdue, Jeff Brom tested positive for COVID in lead up to that game. He missed the game, and Purdue still won. So Kirk brought this up this week, that the head coach on game day doesn't really do a whole lot. He leaves that in the hands of his assistant coaches. Right. So, wish the best for Brett and a speedy recovery from his test for COVID. And we'll talk Iowa football here in a little bit with Mark. But again, Gary, thank you for joining us. We'll talk next week.
Sounds good, Cory. Take care.
For Coach Gary Close, I'm Cory Brada from the Hawkeye of the Storm. We will talk to you soon and in a few minutes over at the Iowa at the Voice of College Football channel here on YouTube. Take care.